What's going on, everybody? The Real Sharif M here, aka Manganus Steel, and today we're going to talk about knife standards. Alright, everybody, so what can I tell you about this knife that you haven't seen? I mean, really, if you look at the reviews, Neves Knives, Lefty EDC, they did the initial reviews of these knives about 6 months ago. And everybody else who's gotten them in the pass arounds and all of that stuff, I'm kind of the last of the bunch to get my hands on this knife. So I really struggled to figure out what can I tell you that you haven't seen or heard before about this knife. I mean, what I can really do, I feel that is different than everybody else is look at this from a purely design perspective and look at some of the elements that really I think were done very well, and what are some things that I think can improve potentially in the knife design if he does a version 2. Let's talk about what I do like about this knife first, more than anything. The number one thing that actually really took me by surprise is, first, this is the first knife that I've ever handled with such extensive milling. And it's not just like superficial light milling. No, this is like pretty deeply ground milling. And even for a prototype such as this, it's really nice in the hand. And I have not typically been very much a fan of milling, unless you're talking about like a Sharp by Design or a Shirogorov kind of level of milling where it's, flowing all throughout the body of the knife. But this is done very tastefully, exceedingly tastefully, I would say, especially considering the lines and the character of this knife. It's definitely one of my favorite parts about it, and really is compelling in a market of just kind of slab-sided titanium frame locks. Now, the other thing that I really like about this knife is this thing is a bit of a pocket ninja. And what I mean by that is, so in my pocket, what I usually carry in my front right pocket is my knife and my wallet. I usually clip my keys onto a belt loop, and so the idea for me most of the time in doing that is I'm not bunching up a lot of stuff in my pockets, first of all. Two, I'm not allowing my keys to potentially like scratch up my knives or anything like that. Especially when you're a guy like me who likes to carry bigger knives a lot of the time, it just opens up the space. What's really amazing is for a knife that's this size, and let's look at it versus, let's say, a Chavez, right? It's about the same length as a Chavez, a little bit shorter than a full-size Synapse. Let's see, what's another good example? About the same length, just maybe a touch shorter than a PM2. This thing really disappears in the pocket in a way that the other knives don't. I don't know if that's just due to the width of it, but my real suspicion is these sort of deeply angled lines here that give it this sort of contouring effect. Maybe you guys can kind of see it a bit better there. Yeah, you can really see how deep those angles go. And just to let you know, in like the knife world, for scales, you don't have a lot of room to work with. So these angles are really, really compelling, I have to say. And this thing just literally, anytime I've slid it into my pocket, and it's not necessarily a lightweight knife. If I had to place a guess without putting it on a scale, I would guess this is over about 5 ounces. It disappears in my pocket. And I've often forgotten that I've had it there until I've reached my hand into my pocket, which is a really, really surprising and compelling thing about this design. I am also a huge fan of compound ground knives. I think this is really one of the best ways for EDC knives to be done, personally. There are techniques where you can get a similar effect without doing a distinct compound, but the idea of having a much thinner section back here where you're going to be like doing slicing and push cutting, and having a little bit more of a robust section here through the tip, because I don't know about you guys, but I do a lot of piercing through packages and boxes and things like that, where I do prefer to have a bit of a reinforced tip. I really think that compound grounds or reinforced tip knives in general are superior versus like a full distal taper like you would see on something like a PM2, right? Like this worries me a bit. I see the benefits of it, but it definitely worries me sometimes. Those really, for me, are the highlights. Like, you've got beautiful milling, pocket ninja sort of disappearing axe, compound ground blade, and the angling of the scales really does make it feel like a contoured knife in hand. So really, really well done to the knife standards. Like, chef's kiss, really. Like, you achieved something a bit different here than what I've seen or experienced elsewhere. Now, before I get into what I think could be improved on a version 2 versus this guy, I want to address some of what I've seen in other comments or I've heard from other people when they talk about this knife. The first thing is, when people see this, they say, oh, it's like a Chavez. Well, there's a Chavez. There is no similarity between these knives whatsoever. At all, actually. This is a very straight, neutral-handled knife with a blade with a huge amount of belly and very like minimal but functional jimping here. When you look at a Chavez actually has a very sort of subtly curved handle. It's not a straight handled knife at all. It has a much larger blade section, has this very aggressive jimping, which I wouldn't say necessarily works well. It's just more for aesthetics in my book. But what I do think people confuse when they see the two is just, this is a knife that they are probably most familiar with for having a compound ground blade, right? That's it. And even the blade shapes are not the same, like, at all. Like, really, they're not. This is more of like a drop point. This is more of a straight back. Again, you have this extended belly through here. This has just got a bit of belly, and then it actually goes into a straight section, which this does not. They're very different, and just because you've seen a compound ground knife before doesn't mean all compound ground knives are the same. The other criticism, or not criticism, but like comment that I've seen has been that the lines on the RR standard are the same as the Vero, which they are not. The only potential similarity are these two horizontal lines. That's it. This whole section here, completely different. Tail of the knife, completely different in every way possible. And it just, I don't see what people are saying. Just because, again, one knife has horizontal lines does not make it the same knife as another knife. I mean, I don't know how much variation you can really have with horizontal lines. Those are the two kind of design-related things that I've heard that I wanted to address with this guide. Now, as far as sort of criticisms or improvements, personally, I'm not a huge, for how quality this knife is, I definitely wasn't the biggest fan of going with, you know, the wire pocket clip. And to my understanding, he did offer a replacement milled titanium clip as an option. I do think that just should have been the way this was done from the start, especially for the, I can't remember, it's like $375-ish that this was retailed for. I honestly think that having a nice milled pocket clip just would have kept the lines and kept everything sort of flowing really nicely from a design perspective. The other criticism that I have is I do feel, and I've heard other people make this comment, that the thumb stud access was a little tight. Now, here's the thing. There isn't enough room to actually raise them up flush to the edge of the blade because you have the jimping there and everything. What I do think is a potential solution is see how these are kind of milled at like a slight angle and they're kind of like domed. If those kind of came up more flush, if you look at the Chavez, for example, here, come on, let's get that going. They only have one layer of milling down. So you're getting more of the flat section available to you for deploying the thumb stud. And it's a subtle thing, but these have 2 layers of milling. And I think it just went like 1 layer too low. We're really talking about like 0.5 millimeter here, but I think that would have made a bit of a difference. Now, once you know the best place to put your thumb with this knife, you don't miss it like at all. Like you never have an issue with deploying it ever. But at least initially, when I first handled the knife, I definitely had some slippage when I was trying to do that. So if you do a version 2 knife standards, that is one point that I would consider. And again, we're only talking about a 0.5 millimeter difference. The third thing, and this is something that I really only learned, or perspective that I came to really after only a few years of doing this. And I think, and again, my opinion, other people may disagree with me wholeheartedly. I'm okay with that. This is what I'm about to say is very subjective, not objective. For a knife like this, given its size and overall length, and this being about a 3.6 inch blade, I don't think you should do the finger choil. That's just me. You have enough purchase and enough control with the standard neutral handle that now you're missing like a fair amount of chunk or a fair chunk of potential cutting area here. and you did the plunge grind, or the plunge grind was done beautifully, but I don't think that you need to sacrifice blade area here for this finger choil. In my opinion, and this is more of a recent opinion, the finger choil really suits smaller knives. For example, like this guy, the Native, right? It is really like at least for my double extra large hands here, it really is a 3-finger knife. So when I'm trying to do push cuts, I don't have the control like I would with a 4-finger knife. So it's nice to have that finger choil to choke up on. So now I get more control over the blade, and I can really drive some power into the cuts that I'm doing. When you have a knife such as this, with a full 4-finger grip, really, really solid. I mean, the grip is beautiful on this, right? I don't have the need to choke up. I don't. It's not giving me an additional benefit here that I don't already have here. And that's just me. People who know my designs may be criticizing and saying, well, Sharif, you did that with the VELOCE. You put this choke up here. Well, this knife was designed before I understood that. And it reflects, when you look at my designs that have followed since then, I have stopped doing that in order to optimize and get the maximum amount of blade length out of a knife that is on the longer side. And if you look at these two guys side by side, they're pretty close in overall length. The additional thing that getting rid of this choil would do would allow you to push your primary bevel all the way back almost to the edge. And you would end up, let's see, if I bust out my calipers here, you would gain roughly 7 millimeters. Yeah, let's call it 7 millimeters. So that would translate to an extra 1/4 inch of cutting area on the blade. And I think that would be really nice. And it's completely doable because you're not using the choil for the stop pin. You're using you've got the stop pin up here, which is beautifully placed, and I think complements everything about this knife really well. So at least an extra 1/4 of an inch of cutting area, I think, would be perfect for this knife, and I would literally have no critiques on it, essentially, at that point. For a very first offering, this is phenomenal. This is a stunning, really, really well done knife. I don't know many people who could have bested this, to be honest, as a first offering into the world. So I absolutely commend you, Knife Standards. I think this thing is really, really great, really, really well done. I think just a few minor revisions. I mean, look at that. That thing is just smooth, man. It's really, really nice. And if you guys have already seen all of the reviews, you know everybody has been talking about how nice this thing, how slicey it is, and all of that. But I do think, like, you gave it just a little bit more blade length. Maybe just, don't mill as deep into the thumb studs and give us like a milled clip right from the get-go. This thing would be untouchable. Absolutely untouchable. It's already phenomenal. Love all the captured hardware, all of that stuff. I think that's phenomenal. T8s all around, Magna Cut. Like, bro, you knocked it out of the park. Those little critiques, though, I think would really make this next level untouchable.